Good morning, everyone. It's Jess Pettitt, and today we are doing Chapter 16, the Department of the Interior. And I'm coming with a trophy. On the off chance that you are procrastinating something and watching all of these videos, which, for the record, go fold your laundry. This chapter, Chapter 16, my friend Kristen has stupidly volunteered to also read and discuss with me, and it's her second chapter because she's a glutton for punishment. And prior to hitting record, I already spoiled the surprise with Kristen, so now it is you, the procrastinating observer. This chapter wins most terribly written. Now, I'm going to sound like a condescending elitist liberal, largely because I'm an overeducated, condescending, leftist, extremist liberal. No spell check, no Grammarly, no like, hey buddy, do you mind like putting some eyes on this before I hit send? So I'm going to pretend that like hours after the deadline, somebody at Heritage Foundation was like, oh shit, we forgot the Department of Interior. And they wrote it handwritten on a bus that was clearly very crowded. That is the most charitable start I can think of for this particular chapter. Very, very hard to read because it is so poorly written. Not in just like a vocabulary way, but like incomplete sentences, random thoughts, side
Typos.
notes, typos. Like I don't, but we tried. Kristen, high five. We both tried very, very, very hard to do this. Okay, so that's my coming in hot. Is I want to give some respect to the other authors who at least used the free version of Grammarly. Hail to the chief. So, things I did not know about the Department of Interior before starting. And like a lot of the chapters, there's this kind of People magazine vibe of like personal bones to pick. But one of the things that happened in the Department of Interior first administration of Trump, so maybe it'll happen again because it was undone by Biden, was moving the Department of Interior out west into Colorado to be, quote, closer to the land. Just picked up, moved everybody, and then Biden undid that, moved everybody back to DC. And I'm assuming that that could potentially be happening here. It's a big priority for the person on the bus writing this chapter. I'll
Yeah,
start with
it
you,
was.
Kristen. What's your one thing to start off with other than spell check is your friend?
Well, that was number one. But my big take, I think, with the same with the Treasury is I can see that all winding back to the Democracy and Chaos that I read, that it's all about a money grab. Everything they have written in both of these chapters is all about returning land and money back to the richest in the land. That's my biggest
Mhm.
take.
Certainly
So,
not returning it to indigenous people.
oh gosh, no. I mean, yes, you
Yeah.
can pay a lot of money to say you have the land, but then they're going to expect you to return all the wealth in that land
Mhm.
to them, regardless of whether or not
Right.
you want to. Because that was a question I did talk to my friend about that is an indigenous, it belongs to an indigenous nation. And he's like, no, we shouldn't have to do that. It's our land. If we have
Right.
to rebuy it, which is ridiculous in the first place, why should we return its
Right.
essence to you?
So the metaphor there, just again, just in case, is we are the themes of this chapter. Number one, let's super under prioritize the environment and animals and indigenous people. Not a priority, right? So let's just get that out of your dirty little liberal minds. If indigenous people were to purchase back land that was originally theirs, it's almost like then there would be probably not from the federal government because we're trying to deregulate everything on a federal level, but on a state, maybe local municipality level, almost like an HOA, that if they were to
Yeah.
purchase their own land back, they have to meet certain standards of maintaining that land. And one of those standards is any non-renewable resources would go to the HOA landlord piece.
Right.
That's the most charitable metaphor that I can come up with. In Humboldt County, we are pretty systematically, it seems, in the 18 years that I've lived here, giving land back to the indigenous people. They don't even have to buy it. So I'm imagining that their heads exploding is that the people who quote unquote owned the land, who are relinquishing ownership and giving it back to the original indigenous people without even an exchange of money. I imagine that could be kryptonite. Um, yeah. Any other burning holes that we need to get to before we actually attempt to discuss what is written in the chapter?
I will, what we were discussing before we turned on the recording, indigenous people shouldn't have to do any of this. It was their land in the first place. And I don't think, well, actually I asked that they would believe that in being the caretaker of the land, that they would want to dig and drill for these resources because it's mother, Earth is mother. And why would you do that? So I don't even think that would be something that they would consider doing. So is that going to be a part of like a contracted agreement that you have to drill for oil or
Yeah,
minerals or whatever?
I'm gonna go with whatever makes a few people wealthier. That's gonna be the agreement. That's just a hunch.
Yeah.
Um, I yesterday I was talking with someone else, and they used the idiom of bottom on the totem pole,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's probably important to like reference this too. Is that the reason why that is not a good thing to say? Is that in indigenous cultures that use totem poles, there's so much respect and sharing community value, collective responsibility for the land as much as the sky, that
Yes.
wherever you're quote on the totem pole, it is equally as respectful. It's
Yes.
really Christian hegemony situation that like God lives in the sky, so the further away from the sky you are, the less value you have. Or we could get to like hell is down here, right? And
Right.
so when we start talking about sky, water, air, animals, natural resources, the use of land, um, I want to just name that to be completely respectful, we have to check our own kind of linear hierarchy. Whether we identify as a Christian or not, it's probably like filtered in to somehow that this is of less value than this. And so that's not the mindset of collective shared matriarchal um, culture. So talking about ownership of extraction of natural resources is so disrespectful to this like land partner.
Yeah.
Um, so it's not about money. It's not about ownership. It's about sharing and coexisting in unison. So the whole thing is not on that wavelength. We are
No, it's
on
not.
how do we puff up a couple people's wallets. Okay, so let's back up. Department of Interior. So the populations that are most addressed in this chapter, and by that I mean barely acknowledged as humans that are relevant, are American Indians, which we're referring to as indigenous people as an umbrella term. Alaska Natives, which is very relevant because drill baby
Mm.
drill in Alaska is a theme, and then affiliated island communities. And what's interesting about different island based communities is that if we think about Hawaii or Samoa or Guam, um, I'm gonna I'm gonna stereotype and generalize the United States colonization tactics. If not mass murder and gruesome, asterisks, see above. If not crusades based murder, um, there is this moment of negotiation of like, you're going to lose. So you can either lose
Right.
to us, and we promise you all these good things, or you can lose to other people who are not promising you these good things. So then ultimately sovereignty is given to the United States, but in a very manipulative manner. And then technically, the United States has not upheld any of agreements with anybody 100%. So whether
Right.
that is native land or islands or Alaska or Hawaii or what we're referring to as reservations, the cooperative, not cooperative,
Right.
co-oping and manipulation involved in acquiring this land for its natural resources, for colonization, for expansion. We've heard a lot about manifest destiny and Western
Mhm.
expansion in the last 48 hours. Um, Military locations, strategic locations, um, is for a purpose that is to benefit the power
Mhm.
of the US government.
100%.
I just want no red, no alarms. Yes, that seems to be a standard. So ultimately, we're talking about land use that could be grazing, logging, mining, natural resources, primarily oil and gas leasing, coal. I'm going to even go as far as some allusions to wind farms, solar farms,
Mhm.
which we can't say out loud because that would be supporting the climate and environment. But the land required for those things, I shared in another video that I was at a conference in Nebraska, and some bigwig, nice guy, bigwig at the like power distributor for the state was talking about how 1% of agricultural or ranchers in Nebraska, if 1% gave up land, or if 1% of the land used for agriculture or ranching was given up, that's the better way of saying it,
Okay.
and solar panels were put in, Nebraska would be able to produce its own energy
Oh,
just from
yeah.
1% of the land, which is interesting to me because that doesn't seem very much. But the farmers and ranchers are totally opposed to this because one, green energy has a bad rap. Two,
Right.
it's aesthetically unpleasing.
I think they're
And
beautiful.
but this is what he said: is
Yeah.
that people want to see form, not fields of solar panels. And the stereotype that you're a pinko commie liberal because you have solar panels on your land. Those are the three reasons it won't happen. Here we are, Department of the Interior. Um, Inside, this is also Indian Affairs, land management, ocean energy management, which again, it out here in California, we're talking about doing all the stuff in the ocean to generate green energy, reclamation of hydroelectric power, safety and environment enforcement, the entire National Park Service, surface mining, reclamation and enforcement, Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Geological Survey Office. Um, I didn't know that all that stuff was in the Department of Interior because I have never thought about the Department of Interior.
No.
Maybe I should have, but sure didn't. So, kind of consistent baseline, right,
Hmm.
is America first, America's energy dominance, US based energy dominance. And we, at the time of this recording, Trump has now been inaugurated, and today is day 2 in his administration.
Hold it. Yep.
The energy dominance is also connected to, because of don't tell anyone, global warming, the ice shelf is melting, so there's more access to land in the Arctic
Hmm.
Circle for drill baby drill 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 baby drill. um, so one of the priorities is reversing Biden policies to achieve, quote, energy security by allowing more fracking and drilling for oil and gas, especially in Alaska. But I'm actually, because I've read some of the other chapters, Alaska is the link to this very competitive race right now to have natural resource dominance in the Arctic Circle because the ice shelf is melting. So that's part of the reason I think that Greenland isn't
Yeah,
as random as it sounds if you're not thinking about this, because Russia, China, United States,
right.
Canada, and Greenland are the countries that make
Yes.
up the Arctic Circle. So Greenland is random, but it's kind of connected to drill, baby, drill.
Yeah, it's definitely not random, I don't think.
Um, all right. What else do I got going on? Three more key points. Give states and Indian tribes more power to decide about energy production and land use, which sounds great,
Right.
except this is rooted in the free market economy. So what it's saying is that private business can make offerings to states and or Indian tribes, indigenous lands, etc., and they can then get locked into a contract with a private business as far as how energy is going to be produced. So then land people living in different parts of land may have different private sector businesses providing their electricity, internet, possibly even like water, waste disposal, that all of this is going to move to the free market, and that individual states and individual tribal lands, which I would little shout out to some acknowledgement that tribal lands could also have sovereignty over the lands that we promised them. It doesn't mean that, but it was, it's on the chessboard. But by them being able to have the power, depending on who's in leadership at the time, that could evolve and change, which is the risk of doing business. And again, we're centering capitalism instead of human thriving. Thoughts, Kristen? Other than is your
Mm,
head exploding yet?
little bit, because like in the first one I said this as well, is I've been a conservationist type of person for decades. I am a
Should not
certified.
have read this.
I know. I thought, oh, when I started reading about it, because I too did not really know what the Department of the Interior was, I thought, oh, this would be a perfect chapter for me with my interests and my background. I'm a certified scuba diver, saw firsthand bleaching of coral and species decline and stuff like that. Um, and it's not
No,
quite
you
related,
didn't.
but I thought that would be
No,
in
you
it
didn't.
for me.
You didn't see any coral dying while
No,
diving because that's all fiction.
I know. I'm a liar. Pinky comma liberal.
Uh-huh.
And several
Uh,
times through this chapter, I've written little notes like I did on the last one, and one of them it was a few pages back. It said climate change. Here it is. These funds can be devoted to reducing the risk of wildfires, increasing recreational opportunities, conserving public lands, and addressing tough issues such as wild horses and burros. I'm like, climate change? If we maybe discuss climate change a little bit more, we could reduce the risk of wildfires. I don't know.
right.
Yeah.
This is what I mean by this like People magazine vibe. Like,
Yeah.
what
Yep.
what do you got against wild horses and burros? Like that is
Oh,
so
they're killing the land. Some places it's like concrete.
okay. So first off, I did Google it because I was like, why are we doing this?
Yeah, I did
My
too.
point is that it was so outlandishly specific that I
I
was
know.
like, you could like be this specific about larger problems like the
Right?
environment. But no, no, no. We went
No.
straight to slaughtering horses and burros because the land is being damaged. And this is what's important, at least in my Google search. The land that's being damaged, it's because of the property value or the
Right.
equity of the land. It's not as pretty.
Right.
Therefore, it is less likely to actually be built up
For the
into
nuisance wild horses and burros.
housing. And people also don't want to build residential or commercial communities that are then bothered by wild horses
Right.
and burros. They'd like to
Right.
see them over there, but not up here.
Right.
Um, the other possible slippery slope to talk about the environment, also, don't tell Elon Musk this, directly stating stop supporting the use of electric vehicles.
I saw that. Yep.
Yeah, don't do that. Interestingly, the Department of Energy, all about autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles. Department of Interior, bad news bears, no
Yeah.
electric vehicles.
So
Um,
left isn't talking to right again.
Sometimes in the same chapter. Um, that particular piece and kind of what you just said too reminded me of, this is like a hurts my heart travesty thing, but when during COVID there was like a temporary government shutdown, and ATV, all-terrain vehicle recreational people, were in Joshua Tree and just started cutting down the Joshua trees that are, prehistoric and have been there for hundreds, thousands of years. You can't uncut down a tree.
Right.
But when it talks about land open for recreational use, that's what I'm.
That's
That's
what
what
comes to
came to
mind.
mind, right? Is that we don't have enough respect for the land, history, or the future, but we want to be able to ride our ATV that is gas guzzling because it's not allowed to be electric up the dunes or whatever.
And let's just take it one step further, because we also want to now colonize Mars or Jupiter
Yeah.
or maybe all the planets, build bubbles and live in bubbles. So why not destroy those too?
Right. If we're doing a slow destroy on here, we figured out how to speed it up. So let's do it
Right.
someplace else.
And they do
Um,
talk about cutting down the trees, using if the forests were intended to be cut and sold.
mhm.
That's part of the responsibility of the Department of the Interior, is to manage
Right.
cutting and selling the wood that comes from the trees.
Right. Because
No mention, now that I'm saying that out loud, of replanting trees to replace
no,
what we've taken. There is not a mention anywhere about
no, because
reintroducing.
right, there's no reintroduction, there's no growth, there's no future thought, and the prioritization is the extraction for
Yep,
capital gains or profits right now. There's
yep.
no forethought.
And not for
Um,
us, not for us. Keep that in mind. None of the profit goes to us. It
no, no, no,
goes to
no.
that
This is
1%. It goes to the Elon Musks and all those
the
folks.
zillionaires.
Yeah,
What is interesting though, and I know who'd have thunk there would be some hypocritical arguments inside of the mandate for leadership, but yet here we are. We've talked about all of this like crop cutting, land clearing, get rid of the wild horses and the burros because they're destroying the aesthetics of potential real estate development. However, keep federal lands open for grazing, because then the federal lands, one, the animals can graze it, but then those animals are then slaughtered,
right.
right? So we're just using our natural resources.
Yep, yep, yep.
Oh, okay, okay.
I
Okay.
know.
Um, okay, one more section of notes, and it actually does attempt to identify the stakeholders, which is the one of the few references of Edward Freeman's stakeholder focus versus Milton Friedman's shareholder focus. So I do think that's important to mention, that while on a very crowded bus, you slipped and started talking about stakeholders, which is a broader swath of community elements throughout the entire value chain of whatever it is you're creating, and that's supposed to be held center, not just shareholders and return on investment. So they use the word stakeholder. I'm sure it was a typo, but it's in there, and I want to name it in the chapter that also gets the trophy for the worst written. um, in honor of my friend Thomas, who likes to go down the citation rabbit holes, I do think it's also important that the author of this chapter does use footnotes,
Hmm.
does, but the only source in the footnotes are things that he has written. So they are self promoting mirror reflections of his own opinions. Those are the only citations in the entire chapter. Um, so one side of your mouth, you're talking about a broader thing of stakeholders, which got me very excited, but you are justifying your claims by justifying your claims and citing your own justification of your own
Right.
claims. That is not good journalism, I think is an understatement. So the stakeholders that were mentioned, and we've already talked about some of these, is or the stakeholder issues, I guess is better stated. One, we talked about the BLM Bureau of Land Management headquarters moving to Colorado versus Texas. My guess is now it will be moved back. Law enforcement and officers and what that
Mm-hmm.
means to be Department of Interior law enforcement and officers, probably slippery sloping straight to Homeland Security related to immigration issues would be my guess. The
Mm-hmm.
dreadful wild horses and burros problem, Alaska,
Yeah,
just Alaska. What a concern. Really looking at the energy independence of oil, gas, leasing, coal, and then different minerals as well, um, not just things that we use for gasoline or for like
right.
um, heat, coal, etc., but looking at specific minerals that are currently imported from other parts of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's a lot of hypothesis that under the ice shelf, we would have enough of these minerals to either solve our own problems and not need to import or become a major exporter. Then we're talking about wildlife and waters. And then just a little side note, Indian nation schools.
Oh yeah, because that
I was
fits.
waiting if we go with like the meter of the other chapters, then I would assume Indian nation schools would at least get like thrown off to Department of Education, which they're basically interested in
Right.
dissolving, but no direct arrow made because they were on a crowded bus. So I'll just imply it because they forgot to write it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's there, but as a side note, um, totally off chapter, you mentioned this. Um, it talks about our energy dependence. We're actually a net provider of energy, and our crude isn't the kind of crude you need to make fuel. It's a light crude. You need a heavy crude, and our infrastructure for transporting that crude is pipelines, and the heavy crude can't do that. Heavy crude has to be pulled out and trucked, which would require all new roads. Ambler Road in Alaska, going through wild refuge land and Indian nations and all that stuff, um, kind of threw me for a loop, that whole thing.
Yeah.
Because
And
they
if
talk
we want to
about
get
how
even more,
we don't have our own energy. We are an exporter of energy.
right. And if you want to get a slightly more complicated about yet another thing they forgot to write down while on a crowded bus, any of those pipelines that are used for the lighter crude are in conjunction with Canada and Mexico
Right.
that we are not making friends with right now.
No, no. Let's just rename the Gulf of Mexico and take away the Panama Canal.
Oh my gosh. Okay. That is the Department of Interior.
I know.
Uh, so now let's spend a couple of minutes other than rolling my eyes in the back of my head. Okay, so we're at home. We're at our dinner table. What do we need to know? Um, the first thing I could think of, and then Kristen, I'll open it up to you and see if you have any thoughts and ideas, because your experience is vast in the areas in which this chapter just kind of casually and brutally reference.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
I would say number one, depending on where you are, where is the closest national park, state park, um, BLM lands, indigenous lands? You don't necessarily have to do anything, but just where are they? How far away are you
Right.
from any of those things? I will be completely frank. It wasn't until a statistics assignment in my statistics class for my MBA that I got during COVID that it really ever dawned on me that there are state parks and national parks.
Right. Yeah.
They're gonna look the same or whatever. So state parks are obviously funded and run and maintained by the state level, which is going to be where the preference is because we're trying to lean towards federal deregulation. National parks are usually declared by US presidents to become national parks or protected lands. So, where are you in the grand scheme of things? What's around you? Maybe even contact your local BLM office or region to find out what is what is close to where you currently reside, and is there any support or volunteer work that can be done on a local, state, or national park level? Um, there's a lot of movement in my consciousness, starting in the Obama administration, of renaming things back to
Mm,
indigenous names. So similar when we're talking about Mount McKinley, instead of Mount Denali, right? Like it was Denali, then it was named McKinley, then it went back to Denali, and now the motion is being made for it to be called McKinley again because we're all about Western expansion, manifest destiny, and
America
colonization
first.
of Christianity and capitalism. Welcome to the second administration. Um, so knowing those things, I think, is important. I know here where I live, a lot of things have been renamed back to their original names, and I have to catch myself from calling it what I was introduced it to.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
practicing that and using indigenous names for things. That's kind of where my brain immediately went. And I guess be on the lookout for wild horses and burros.
Yeah, because they get you every time.
Sneaky.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about you? What are some things that you think would be
Um,
beneficial for people who don't necessarily go scuba diving or, see some of this stuff first?
I agree with everything you said because to me, educating yourself because they're not going to do it for us because we can see by this lots and lots and lots of papers that say nothing, that they're not going to educate us on the actual, sorry about that, on the actual facts. There's nothing wrong with looking at green energy. I think that's super important to know. And it's so available. Like solar power is not going to damage anybody. You can put solar panels on top of buildings, on top of car parks, you don't have to take up beautiful landscapes. Windmills are to me, I'm from Massachusetts originally, and we've had windmills for decades. And I think
Mhm.
they're so you come around a corner and you see these big, beautiful, slow moving propellers, and it's just like artwork to me. But okay, they kill birds once in a while. And I know he thinks they cause cancer,
Right.
but
They kill
all
birds,
that
and
is
also
important.
there is a lot of I didn't know this, but I married an environmental ethicist, right? Is that we're doing things to produce energy for human consumption on land that should be prioritizing animals that were there first. So even like the vibrations, killing birds, the space in the land, it's very disruptive as far as like
Mhm.
migratory patterns.
Yes.
Those are things to be thought about
Yep. Yep.
and think about it, right? So
We're
again,
not
I live
kings.
I live right here on the ocean, and they're talking about putting in some wave turbines,
Mm,
and even just the optical internet cables. They can't be underground here because of earthquakes and fires, and they're not in the air because of earthquakes and fires. So they're floating in the ocean, but that's really disruptive to like
yeah.
sea lions and whales and things like that because they're electrified, right?
Yep.
So
And the
I'm not
pulses affect their radar because that's how they
right.
move about and hunt and all that.
So I am not I am a native Texan, so I am not at all going to say that I understand or get it or think about it, but I do think it's my responsibility to notice I'm not thinking about it.
Yeah. Yep. I agree with that too. That was one of the conversations we had last night is I said to my high school friend that we are stewards of the land. And he said,
Mhm.
I don't even see us as stewards. We are the land. We are one
Mhm.
with the land. And I'm not a Christian or I was raised Catholic, but I believe that too. I believe in we're energy. We are all connected by energy. So we are part of the land. We're not just some random masses walking around without a connection. So I see that. And when you started mentioning the wave patterns and everything being disrupted, I thought about whales and seahorses and all the little creatures
Right.
that would
And
be,
I mean, even just taking the time, again, I married an environmental ethicist, and so occasionally I get to read essays or some of my partner's writings, and just sitting with realizing that I value living things differently and just
mhm,
taking responsibility for that. Like, I love me a seahorse. Like, I am fascinated by seahorses. I think they're amazing, right? And I basically donate zero
yep.
thought to whales.
Oh,
I'm not saying anything bad about whales. No offense, whales.
right, right,
But
right.
like, I don't think about whales. Dolphins, I think about those. They've been made a little more mainstream, right?
Right.
I didn't
Lisa
know the
Frank.
difference between a sea lion until again I moved to the coast. Um, Sea lions are big.
Hmm.
Whoa, right? So like you don't have to pass judgment to actually hold thought. And if we're
Right.
not thinking about what we're prioritizing, the key isn't to prioritize everything exactly the same way. The key is to recognize that you don't. So then what benefits from your consciousness? That I think that those are there. I'm not trying to be or pass judgment. I'm trying to state that I had to slow down enough to even begin to think about these things um, because I live in such a beautiful area that focuses so much on like the outdoors, and I am an avid indoorsman. There are places that I can go to that are accessible to me. I benefit from like clearing my mind by being able to go there. And I don't think about it. I don't think about who empties the garbage. I don't think about who maintains the sidewalks. There's another place I like to walk that the first 2 miles are paved and completely flat so that they're accessible to wheelchairs and strollers and walkers to get people out into the redwoods. Um, my suggestion is just think about what do you think about so that you can then be conscious of what you think about and then provide some space for what you're unconsciously not even like acknowledging exists.
Yeah.
um, that in some ways I think that's the only act of resistance because the dogma that's going to come down is going to only talk about the few's profits that we can extract from the land, and
Yeah.
that's it. So, again, Kristen, thank you for suffering through yet another chapter. And this one again, the prize for the worst written chapter in the
Read it.
entire document. You're welcome. Don't read it, just watch this video.
Yeah. I do
Starting
think that
westwards.
conversation, I think this is, I don't know, I didn't read the other chapters except for Treasury. Maybe one with that line of exit speech is the one that maybe makes us think a little bit more consciously and maybe makes us view things in a way other than how it affects us. Like, how do we take a step towards protecting our home as opposed
Mhm.
to raping it, to
Yeah.
use the strongest language I can.
Well, I
And I
mean, but
think
it
that
seems,
that makes it the deepest chapter, maybe.
yeah, in a lot of ways, and again, this is from an environmental ethics article that maybe I'll see if I can find it and I'll attach it to the video. But the view of planet Earth, if it was viewed by capitalists as a man, it would be much harder to extract so much
Mm,
of its natural resources out of it. By
truth.
making the Earth the woman, it is much easier to write a story that the Earth is nurturing our choices to take advantage of her.
Right.
Um, so the idea of how sexism can show up in metaphor so that we feel far less guilty about leaving more damage than when we showed up is an
That
important
is.
mindset to at least ponder. You don't have to agree with it, but at least like think about what that would mean. All right. Well, another chapter in the can. Thank you so much, Kristen. Don't
Thank you.
volunteer for any more. Clear your brain.
Yeah, right.
Okay,
Thank you so
bye.
much for letting me be involved with this.
Absolutely.